Hi everybody, welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be checking out Superman issue 8 by Joshua Williamson, Gleb Melnikoff, Norm Rapmund, David Baldion, and Jamal Campbell. The Superman family's battle with the Chained continues as Superman turns to Lex Luthor for answers as to who and what the Chained exactly is. Most of the issue was action, but during the action, Williamson parcels out small bits of information on the Chained and how his powers work and how he got them. Although I'm surprised at the lack of anything really solid in the way of lore building for the villain, as everything we get told this issue about his powers and why he was locked up was stuff we either already knew, or you could just make an educated guess on what it would be, since it was quite standard and quite, I don't want to say generic, but for better lack of a word, I'm just going to use the word generic. It's a little bit disappointing, as I was hoping there would be more solid ties to Superboy's origins, as we obviously found out last issue. The Chained uses tactile telekinesis, which is the power that Superboy has, and we do learn over the course of this issue that Cadmus did take Lex's notes from his experiments on Sam Stryker to eventually use them to make Superboy, but I was kind of hoping there would be a bit more of a connection there, like maybe the Chained was version 1.0 of the Superboy project, and it was only really kind of perfected with Connor, since he was like the one that actually turned out good, and in a way that sort of is what happens. However, it's all very loose, and it's just made in a way that they just coincidence that they have both the same powers. There is hints that the Chained is a bit more powerful than Connor with the tactile telekinesis, because it's tied to his rage, which he has no small amount of, as obviously he really hates Lex Luthor for imprisoning him, as well as rejecting him for what he was. And I like how Williamson does set this out, where Lex tells his side of the story and how Sam murdered his father and became a monster, so he had to imprison him. Whereas the Chained says that Lex is the villain and Lex rejected him, just like how his father rejected him and tried to imprison him. Again, it's like the situation in The Last Jedi, where who's really telling the truth there? Whose side of the story is the actual truth? Whereas in reality, it's that middle ground. It's both of them are telling half of a truth, and I'm intrigued to see if Williamson actually does reveal the true story about what happened. And I assure you, Lex just probably did something extremely evil. I mean, he already did by imprisoning a child. So I'm looking forward to seeing if we get that explored a little bit more, and it would help also flesh out a little bit more of who the Chained is, which was really hoping we would get this issue, but we didn't really get anything, as I said before, that we didn't already know about the villain. Dr. Farm and Mr. Graft, of course, make another appearance, and I really wish they are in the book a little bit more than they are at the moment, since they were in last issue in one page, they're in this in practically one page as well. For big new villains that Williamson teased really heavily in those early first issues of this series, they've barely showed up. They're kind of puppeting things from the background, but you would think by now we would have had an issue getting to explore them a little bit more, explore more of their background with Lex and how they were his villains, and now we get to see them sort of going around, I guess, recruiting a Superman revenge squad almost, or a Lex Luthor revenge squad I should say, as they try to recruit Sam Stryker to their little team, which is implied to also maybe contain Parasite and Metallo and Bizarro and maybe even Marilyn Moonlight, as it's revealed that Lex has had a run-in with her in the past and maybe did something to her that affected how no one seems to really know who she is. Again, it's just stuff that like Williamson spent those first couple of issues really teasing heavily, and then just kind of dropped there for a little bit, just to focus on the Chained, which is all well and good. You're building up a new villain, but maybe build the ones you've already got already, especially Marilyn Moonlight, who was really quite interesting and was leading to like a really cool looking story where Superman's going to travel to the Wild West and Lois was getting involved running down cases on her and everything, but then it just kind of petered out with that annual issue where Cat Grant got an exclusive interview, and that's like the last thing we heard of her. I'm really hoping we get to see a bit more of her in the coming issues, especially since we're going to be going into a Superman-centric event with Brainiac very soon. So across the issue, Superman and his family are obviously fighting the Chained, and it leads to quite a few big action sequences with the Chained, though I find myself a little underwhelmed, just because the Chained, of course, is using his chains a lot, and we know for a fact that he can do a lot more than that, especially since the last issue where he pulled 2 buildings out of the ground and toppled them down onto the family. So we know he can do so much more, and then Williamson doubles down a little bit this issue, and right in the opening page sets off a Chekhov's gun of sorts as Sammy is told about his powers and told about the tactile telekinesis, and he theorizes that since his powers work on everything that he touches or everything he comes in contact with, that includes stuff like air molecules and just atoms in and around him. So theoretically he could control all of reality itself. Now that's something you don't really set up, let alone open an issue with, unless you're going to use that in a coming issue, and that's quite an important thing because that's a really powerful power, being able to warp reality at your will. That's huge. That's a huge game changer of a power, though we haven't seen any sort of thing like that yet. We keep getting told the chain is very dangerous, but he always just uses his chains, and the chains are seemingly pretty easy to get out of, being that Superman was able to get out of them last issue, and both him and Superboy got out of them pretty easily this issue, and that seems to be the only power Sam uses. So I'm really hoping they actually change things up a little bit with the villain next time we see him, and he starts using his powers a little bit more creative. They get flashes of it this issue with him really coolly crushing some guards into like small balls. That was quite cool, and he just needs to do more stuff like that and start, you know, pulling apart the earth and throwing mountains and whatnot, since Superman is a character who can take that sort of punishment, so why not run with that and just go all out? That would be great, and it would give the artists a chance to sort of flex their creative muscles when it comes to the action sequences. Speaking of artists, this book has been carved up by 4 different artists, and I was really worried when I read all of those names in the credit page at the beginning of the book, but Gleb, Norm, Dave, and Jamal all have visually similar art styles to work with, so they work really well together and are all pretty consistent. This isn't something like Jamal Campbell's art followed by someone, say, like David Mack or a Lee Weeks, whose art is just a completely different style, and it just gives you a visual whiplash. That doesn't happen here, as all 4 artists work really well together. The action they do is really well scripted and sequenced, and it uses the maximum amount of page space they can. No, nothing was wasted in this issue when it comes to page space and action. Anyway, the book ends with Superman defeating the Chained by utilizing Supercorp again, using a kryptonite covered suit to help defeat the villain, who is also weak to kryptonite as well, because Lex of course made him weak to kryptonite. That feels a little convenient that kryptonite would be the only thing that could get through his force shield. Like, surely he could have found something else, like could have used something like maybe nth metal, but no, it had to be kryptonite so we could get the end where the suit shatters and Superman is left covered in kryptonite, and even with kryptonite jutting out of his chest, and gives us a tease that he's going to be put in a set of armor to help, I guess, stabilize him or help get rid of the kryptonite radiation, which I'm kind of excited for. I like all of these new costumes that Supercorp has afforded Superman to have. I like when he dresses in like a lead-lined suit to fight a villain. It was very reminiscent of the animated series when he would do that quite a fair bit, and I hope the Superman armor that we get in the next issue that's teased as well is similar to the one he actually wore in a Batman Superman story from the mid-2000s, where something very similar happened, where he was collecting kryptonite and he had to have a special suit on, and it looked really cool. Had a big long cape, and it was like a full Iron Man armor, and very much looking forward to seeing more Supercorp involvement in this book in the coming issues. Superman issue 8 finally revealed to us a little bit more about the Chained and his origins. However, I can't help but be disappointed in how surface level everything felt and how generic supervillain it really felt. I thought we were in for something truly special with this character, and hey, maybe we will get that eventually once the story fully fleshes itself out, but right now it was kind of a disappointing series of revelations, especially when you look at like where they were headed with it, and it looked like they were going to be tying things like Superboy's past into the Chain's adventures, and how Lex was a superhero, and none of that really comes up at all, and it's just sort of a byproduct of this character existing almost. Here's hoping the coming issues flesh that out a little bit more, and we get to go a bit more in depth into Sam Stryker and his past. I'm going to give this issue a 7.5 out of 10.